You are listening to The Memory Keeper by Evan Vaile. Chapter 13.
The corridor was just like countless others in the facility. Cold, grey, featureless. Hidden by the darkness were the low ceilings and a white linoleum floor which stretched so far into the distance one could become lost simply walking in a straight line. If it was the feeding rooms which took from the subjects their humanity, then it was the corridors which took from them their hope. For no matter which way they fled through the subterranean labyrinth, they knew they would always be faced with yet another identical corridor. The hallways were stark and institutional, with no decorations whatsoever, comprising only the bare essentials to keep the world out and the subjects in. These were the bleak concrete passageways where morality was discarded as being antithetical to survival. The corridors were one of the subtler evils of the program. An environment which surgically extracted the compassion from a subject, the joie de vivre, until all that remained was the sinner and the soul. Bob warily stepped from the stairwell and shone his torch around level 7. The corridor was empty and undamaged. The walls disappeared in both directions, well beyond the range of his flashlight. He knew the cell doors were further down the hallway. The doors led to the isolation cells, in theory always locked unless the subjects were being escorted elsewhere by armed guards. Strange how loud total silence can sound. Bob was an undemonstrative and staid individual, known among the staff for his equanimity and self-possession in emergencies. All his life, in the face of even considerable danger, he experienced only mild fear. Nevertheless, as he sneaked along the corridor, he imagined the soundless squeak of his leather shoes could be heard all the way back at the control room, and was surprised to find himself perspiring. One of the beads of sweat along his forehead made a dash between his eyebrows and down the bridge of his nose to his nostrils, where it clung to his skin for a moment before Bob wiped it aside with a shaky hand. Then his torchlight illuminated the first cell door. He didn't need to check if it was locked. It lay gaping like a giant toothless mouth, chuckling at him with silent laughter. The label on the door read PXS132, beneath which was the name Caber, written in bold black lettering. Bob shone his light inside the cell briefly before moving down the hallway, unhappily discovering door after door wide open, the isolation cells empty with no hint of where the occupants had gone. He was nervous now. He spent as much time looking behind him as he did in front. Grabbing his radio, he backed up against the wall and spoke into the microphone in a soft whisper. "Come in, control room," he said. "Bob?" the reply said. "Bob? I'm at level 7 and security is off," he stated. "I repeat, security is off. The cell doors are wide open and the subjects are gone. Over." There was a long pause while the control room discussed this piece of intelligence. Bob pointed his flashlight into the darkness, toward the far end of the corridor, his eyes watchful. The shotgun was a comfortable weight in his hands, his finger resting easily on the trigger. His eyes discerned a shape further down the hallway, something big, almost like a wall. But he knew this corridor was a long one, like all the corridors, and he ought not be able to see its end from where he was standing. Curious, he started down the hallway, taking care to check each isolation cell was empty before he passed it. As he neared the obstruction, he realized with a shock it was a train lying at a 45-degree angle and having evidently plunged through the ceiling and continued on through the floor. Sliding the radio back into his jeans pocket, he proceeded to make a closer examination of the carriage and the damage it had caused. What caught his attention first was the sizable hole in the ceiling. He shone his flashlight up along the length of the train and saw that its twisted carriages were still bolted together, creating a pathway leading to the upper levels. It took the practical side of Bob's mind precisely 0 seconds to determine that the train wreck almost certainly extended all the way to the subway tunnels, giving the subjects a footway to freedom. He directed his light downward. The train continued on through the floor, perhaps as far as level 9, he guessed. He stepped closer. All of the glass windows along the battered carriage were shattered and gone. Inside, countless bodies were strewn around the seats and aisles, neatly dressed, grotesque and contorted in death. For a moment, the scene was so surreal he had trouble believing what his eyes were seeing. His torchlight revealed only snatches of it, But he understood the whole train must contain scores of corpses, just like this carriage. Whatever had caused this catastrophe, many had suffered, he realised. It had been peak hour in the city. The trains had been full of people. His radio crackled. "Bob, you there?" "I'm here. Over," he replied, still looking in the train. There was something about the bodies, he noticed. Some of them weren't dressed in the smart black suits of office workers, or even the casual clothing of teenagers. But in the tangle of limbs, it was difficult to tell. "Put your mask on now. We're going to gas the place," the voice said. "Do you copy? For God's sake, put your mask on now, Bob." "I didn't bring it with me," Bob replied, both his hands full with the shotgun and radio. "I'm on my way back. Hold the gas. I repeat, hold the gas. Over." Back went the radio into his jeans pocket. He was standing very close to the window of the train. So close, in fact, that someone inside the carriage could reach through the window and grab hold of him, if they wanted to. Someone did. Rough hands latched onto his neck and began to drag him inside. He screamed, shards of glass cutting into his back, but he held onto the shotgun. The mattress of tangled bodies on the floor of the train softened his fall, but the malevolent hands wrapped around his neck only squeezed tighter. As soon as he hit the ground, the cadavers around him seemed to reanimate, writhing with moving limbs, clawing at him from head to toe. Bob gasped for breath and stared, his eyes wide open in fright, too shocked to be scared. But his attackers weren't commuters returned from the dead, but rather inmates of the program, lying in wait among the corpses and wearing their distinctive blue uniforms. They tossed the cadavers aside and lunged at him, their faces gruesome masks of insanity as they wrestled with each other for a strangulating grip on him. Trapped against the ground, he lashed out with the butt of the shotgun and had the satisfaction of breaking a few inmates' fingers. But even as he struggled, more attackers emerged from the darkness and threw themselves into the fray. In his panic, Bob squeezed the trigger, missing everything and blasting a hole in the ceiling of the carriage. The report of the shotgun within the close confines of the train sounded like a crack of thunder directly overhead. The hands ripping at him flinched back in surprise, and Bob found himself momentarily free and able to breathe. Scrambling to his knees, he fired into the darkness, working the pump-action lever on the shotgun in a frenzy, screaming with his own subhuman howl. Both the living and the dead were minced by his onslaught, and the inside of the carriage was painted with death. He squeezed the trigger again and heard the hollow click of the empty chamber. The inmates had flung themselves out the windows to escape his wrath, but in the silence, they began to scurry back. With his shotgun empty, Bob fled over the bodies and out the carriage window, his clothes torn and his back bleeding from the jagged fragments of glass. The corridor of level 7 stretched out in front, the safety of the control room an interminable distance away. He sprinted from the train, leaving a trail of darkness in his wake. His ears registered the pursuit behind him, but it was only when he turned and shone the torch back down the hallway that he saw just how many inmates there were. The train was disgorging scores of them, like angry ants pouring from a disturbed nest in the ground, and they were hurrying after him. The front runners sniffed the air almost as if they were trailing the scent of fresh blood. Their limbs were long, their backs strong and straight. They led the pack and moved with a predator's singular determination. Bob flew down the stairwell, hearing the shrieks of his pursuers only meters behind. He was close to the control room now. Grabbing his radio, he gasped for air and pressed the speaker button. "The train has crashed all the way down to level 9, he screamed. "The program has been opened up like a tin can. The subjects are chasing me. Jesus, they're everywhere. Open the freaking door. Open the freaking door." With burning lungs, he caught sight of the control room door, closed. He leaned on the handle and tried to shoulder the door open, but it wouldn't budge. It was still blocked from the other side. The inmates were almost upon him. "You bastards!" he screamed, beating the steel uselessly. "Open this door. You can't leave me out here." On the safe side of that door, inside the control room, the other engineer stood holding his breath and completely still. His unblinking eyes never strayed from the shotgun barrel leveled at his head. A large desk barred the door. The officer holding the weapon was seated immutably on the desk and spoke in the slow, careful tones that an adult uses when addressing a recalcitrant child. "If we open that door," he said, "the subjects will pour in here and we'll all be killed. There's no sense in having that happen." Bob knew the risks. Bob never expected to be left to die. The shotgun barrel hovered closer. Bob had a job to do, and now he's doing it. The engineer glanced from one officer to another, finally letting his gaze settle on the director and the senior officer standing side by side, ready to turn their keys and release the gas. "You murdering bastards," he spat. "Bob is a good man." The director looked unmoved. Bob's screams of agony were clearly audible as he died at the merciless hands of the inmates. "Was a good man. Masks everyone," he said, strapping his onto his face. The instinct for self-preservation being what it is, the engineer put his mask on even as he began to shake with rage. Without further ado, the director and the senior officer counted down from 3 and then turned their keys in perfect unison. Nothing happened. The 6 men in the control center all glanced up at the vents in the ceiling. The utter silence of the room was matched by the shrieks of bloodlust outside, and Bob's terrible cries. The director cursed under his breath, a syllable lost within the depths of the apparatus attached to his head, and ordered the senior officer to repeat the Protocol Z procedure. The pair withdrew their keys, reset the system, then ran through the countdown again. 2 keys turned, and the director looked up expectantly. Nothing. The director angrily twisted the key back and forth in the mechanism, staring up at the vents, disbelieving that the gas had failed him. Tearing his mask off, he flung it to the floor. "Shit!" he screamed. "The gas should be working." "So should backup systems," the engineer said, for some perverse reason smiling, even though his fate had been sealed too, with the failure of the gas. But remember, Bob said that the train had crashed all the way through to level 9. It must have taken out the entire upper levels. Mainframe, power grid, the lot. Even a separate system like Protocol Z would be destroyed. All we've got now is the batteries in our torches and the bullets in our guns, if that's enough. The director's big nose was twitching in agitation. He paced the length of the room, and when he paused, the engineer saw true fear in the man's eyes. Not a passing shadow of doubt or a temporary lapse in superciliousness. Real visceral fear that spoke of a man who knew he had run out of chances. The inmates were clawing at the door, howling in rage at those inside. With nothing else to fall back on, the 6 were coming to terms with the fact that their refuge wouldn't hold out much longer. Their only option was to navigate a path through the facility, through the murderous inmates, to the safety of the city above. There were enough shotguns for all, and they filled their pockets with extra cartridges. There wasn't much point taking radios, because they all implicitly understood that anyone left behind would be on his own. None of them liked their chances of getting out alive, but this wasn't discussed. Remembering that Bob had said the train wreck extended all the way to the surface, they decided that ascending the stairwells as far as they could was the best course of action, as the elevators were certainly not working. If the stairwells were destroyed at the upper levels, they would switch to the train wreck and get out that way. As his officers determined the final details of the operation, the director couldn't help but reflect on what had gone so terribly wrong with the program. If the mainframe was truly destroyed, then many years of work searching for the genetic markers of a serial killer had been lost. And with the subjects escaping through the subways, a crime wave of biblical proportions was going to descend on Melbourne, something that the police would be powerless to control. The political fallout would be enormous, and the director didn't want to be around when the news reports began. The ramifications didn't bear thinking about. If the mainframe files were gone, it would be difficult to prove exactly what went on down here. The only people who really knew were the director and his officers. There would be allegations of misconduct and criminal investigations. They could be problematic. He would need his people on side. Then an unpleasant thought began to worm its way into his brain. Who of his officers would testify against him? Who would betray him when it came time for someone to bear the blame? His senior officer? Perhaps. He'd always had doubts about the man's loyalty. The other officers? Probably. They were the worst kind of men, hardly men at all. Just sheep, really, waiting to turn on him to save their own careers. How dare they? He was the director, the man who had built this facility from the ground up. He deserved more than their respect. He deserved their protection. Yes, the more he thought about it, the more he realized that it would be best if his officers were killed in an unfortunate accident. "Sir?" the senior officer said quietly. The director blinked. "Sir, Your shotgun, the senior officer said, handing him the weapon. The plan was simple. Two men would drag the desk back sufficiently far to permit the door to open a few inches, and then as many guns as possible would open fire on whomever or whatever attempted to come through the breach. It was agreed the director and the senior officer should handle the desk, while the other four, including the engineer, would handle the guns. When they had all plucked up enough courage to make a run for their lives, the desk was dragged aside and the door allowed to open. The sound of the desk being hauled across the floor silenced the howls in the corridor. And then, the door was cautiously encouraged open by a curious hand. The officers shone their torches into the dark and saw a dozen hungry faces lean forward. "Fire!" howled an officer. Their shotguns roared in fury, spitting pellets and flame. The inmates who dared investigate the open door were reduced to mounds of flesh and blood. Fully loaded shotguns were swapped for emptied ones, the onslaught never ceasing. When the director and senior officer heard the subject's screams fading down the corridor, they removed the desk entirely and swung the door wide open. The armed men continued shooting, clearing their path of the last of the nasties. After the final round had been fired, the silence was as thick as the darkness in the corridor. They had expended half of their precious ammunition, but were standing alone, free of the control room and seized by the sense that they might actually survive this ordeal. They had the weapons. They had the control. They would make it out alive yet. They began to reload their shotguns. The white linoleum was covered in slippery red blood, chunks of human flesh, and strips of blue uniform. The inmates had vanished into the gloom, leaving behind their fallen companions. The engineer counted 10 dead, not including Bob. He swallowed, trying not to look at what remained of his colleague. Stepping over the bodies, they moved off into the darkness. They travelled in the opposite direction of the bloody footprints left by the subjects and soon left the control room far behind. Several levels above, Ratboy's posse was picking its way through one of the carriages, stopping occasionally to search the many pockets presented by a trainload of well-dressed corpses. They were strung out in single file, each carrying a shotgun, a line of black ghosts against the dancing orange glow of the spot fires which burned along the 45-degree incline of the train. They clambered up the massive bodies like a group of climbers hiking up a mountainside. In the half-light, their eyes were of limited use, and they let their fingers do the work, searching the cadavers for little treasures like wallets, purses, rings and watches, anything of value which could be traded in the world above. A world which they knew little about and remembered even less. Ratboy maintained a careful count of the levels as they ascended, and wondered again what had become of the Deacon. That the fiend had an escape plan once the trains rained down, Ratboy was certain, but he would have gladly given someone else's left arm to know what had become of the owner of that mysterious voice behind the wall. He remembered every word the Deacon had said to him, every instruction and criticism, and he wanted to put a face to that inimitable voice. "This is incredible," Caliper exclaimed. "I can't believe how many people we've killed." "Yes," Guill O'tine agreed. "Truly my best work yet." "We must be in the top 10 wanted criminals," Caliper said. "No, probably the top 5. Shady Atkins snorted in derision. "But the police don't even know we exist, so how can we be in their top 5 most wanted?" "Shut up, stop spoiling it," Caliper retorted. "I just want to imagine being the most wanted man in the country. Perhaps I am wanted by the American FBI too. I would like to be famous in my hometown." Ratboy wordlessly listened to these exchanges. A fire burning close to the window illuminated the train in front of him, and he stopped, admiring the smart jacket on a corpse. He pulled it off the dead owner and shrugged it on, sliding his fingers along the silky smooth material. "Yeah, this is what I'm talking about," he said to himself, then turned and looked back at Slayer. "Nice, huh?" In the light, Loco's eye was caught by a similarly trendy piece of cloth. "Ooh, I like this one," he declared. "Can I have it, Rats? Can I?" Ratboy shook his head in frustration, not glancing round. "It ain't mine to give, fool, so yes, you can have it." "Goody, goody," Loco cried happily, putting his foot on the corpse and dragging the jacket free. "I want to look nice when I find myself a pretty nurse to play with." Ratboy cast his gaze over at the bumbling man. "Loco," he began, "that's a woman's jacket." "What?" Loco asked, looking alarmed. No, it ain't. The corpse you just took it off is a woman, Ratboy snorted. So it stands to reason that it's a woman's jacket. Loco had a closer look at the corpse and saw that beneath the tangle of arms and legs, it was indeed a dead woman. God damn it, he muttered. Guill chuckled. You really are very stupid, Loco. Am not. Anyway, look who's talking, you French. Loco's mouth worked soundlessly while he tried to summon up an agreeable insult. Idiot. You can't even speak English good. Loco stripped the jacket off, preparing to throw the embarrassing item away. Wait, Shady said, climbing forward into the light. His eyes appeared cold and detached in the warm glow of the fire. Give it here. Why? Asked Loco suspiciously. Because I want it, Shady replied. He snatched it from the cowering form of Loco and examined the material, testing it between his fingers. After tearing off a strip, he discarded the jacket and then prized a skateboard from the hands of its dead owner lying in the aisle. Raising it high over his head, he plunged the end of the wooden deck onto the nearest sharp metal edge he could find, neatly splitting the skateboard down the middle. All that remained was for him to securely wrap the strip of material around the top of the board and light it on fire. A self-satisfied grin split his face. He held up his makeshift torch for those below to see and waved it around in the air to make drunken shadows lurch across the walls of the carriage. Now we have light, Shady said simply. Ratboy nodded and began to copy the idea. Good thinking. The remainder of the posse followed Shady's lead. The whole scene began to assume a very medieval quality. The bodies, the tunnels, the burning torches. They climbed out of the carriage windows and stood together, staring up at the levels above. Their torches barely penetrated the darkness and gave only a hint of what lay beyond. Wow, Slayer whistled. The surface is only a few floors up, you know. And all we've got to do is follow the trail of bodies to freedom, Caliper said. Kind of like Dorothy following the yellow brick road, don't you think? Slayer frowned. Eh? You remember, Dorothy follows the yellow brick road with the lion and the scarecrow and the Tin Man, Caliper explained. And she taps her shoes together to get back home to Kansas. I don't know what you're talking about, Slayer grunted, but I sure know what I'd do if I ever met Dorothy, and it don't involve her putting her feet together. Shady Atkins' eyes were fixed on the massive hole in the ceiling. So there really is a world up above. It's not just a dream, after all. Ratboy walked away a few paces and held his torch up. The sign on the wall read Level 4. Come on, this way, he called to the others. Pointing their shotguns into the gloom, they started into the corridor. Each found it difficult to leave the train behind. None was naive enough to believe he would ever get another opportunity to escape from the program. But their desire to find the director and repay him for his warm hospitality was equal to their desire for freedom. They were a motley bunch, with their shaved heads and variegated collection of clothing. Ratboy led the way, followed by the larger frames of Slayer and Caliper. Then came Shady Atkins, and Guill O'tine softly humming some French tune learned long ago on the rainy streets of Paris. Next were Roan and Styles, who had both selected colourful ties from the cadavers and twisted them around their necks in their best reproductions of the Windsor knot. Loco brought up the rear, lagging behind the rest and staring down the many adjoining tunnels he passed, waving his flame around in the air, searching for something or someone to set alight. He felt the idea for the burning torches was as much his as Shady's, albeit inadvertently, as it was his serendipity which discovered the beautifully flammable jacket. Grumbling to himself that Shady always took all the credit, he sulked, drifting further behind the group. After a while, Shady Atkins's keen eye was drawn to a pair of regularly spaced black patterns on the white floor of the corridor. A closer examination revealed the markings to be tire tracks left behind by some kind of four-wheeled vehicle. Curious, he kept an eye on them as he walked. 100 meters further ahead, the tracks took a sharp right turn down a connecting tunnel and continued on past the range of his fluttering torch. He paused for a moment, considering his options, then spun on his heels and followed the trail. Hey, Guill called. Where are you going? I want to know where these tracks lead, he replied, his voice echoing in the hallway. The remainder of the company watched Shady's light move away, gently bobbing left and right with his gait, his arm and head appearing to float along through the blackness. With a shrug, they continued after Ratboy. When Loco passed the corridor entrance and spied the bright speck of Shady's torch in the distance, he stopped and yelled out, "What are you doing?" Shady heard him, but didn't deign to respond. And when he glanced back, there was no sign of Loco. He kept moving, reveling in his newfound freedom to explore the caves he had been kept in for so many years. A few minutes later, his diligence was rewarded. The black trail disappeared beneath a large pair of double doors marked with the words, "Engineering." Licking his lips in anticipation, he gave the barrier a kick with one foot, now shod in expensive black leather. The lock clicked open and the doors swung wide on well-oiled hinges. Shady stood at the threshold, his wavery flame held high in an unconscious imitation of the United States Statue of Liberty, and he began to smile at all the toys he had to play with. Ratboy paused briefly beside the twisted body. A guard, curled up in an unnatural position in death and dumped against the wall. From the look of the injuries, Ratboy expertly concluded he had been hit on the head from behind before having his neck deftly broken. The next body a few meters ahead was in a similar state. They discovered the third moments later. He had clearly died of a stomach wound, and Ratboy didn't bother to stop and appreciate the work. He hurried forward excitedly, sensing that the corpses were leading to something or someone. Up ahead, 2 more guards were slumped on the floor in contortions only the dead can feel truly comfortable in, each lying on either side of an open isolation cell door. Ratboy's eager pace slowed, and he held his torch aloft. The inscription on the door read PXS-001, and below that, in bold black lettering, the Deacon. The rest of the company stopped and gaped. "This is it," Guill said. Ratboy nodded, his eyes misty and filled with his own deformed sense of joy. "I told you," he whispered reverently. He pushed the door open. The cell was much as his own had been, except for the interesting contraption in the center, something clearly designed to restrain a person. The now sightless security camera on the wall overlooked everything, including the bed with its rock-hard mattress. The posse moved inside reverently, one by one. At the door, Jill paused and touched his burning torch to the bodies of the guards collapsed on either side. They blazed, illuminating the corridor with an unholy crimson glow. The skin on their faces wrinkled into terrible frowns before melting away. Ratboy caught his breath when he saw the message on the wall. There, carefully painted in blood, which had slowly run, were the words, "Thank you, Ratboy." Slayer chuckled. "Looks like you've made a friend." "I wonder where he is," Ratboy murmured. "He's long gone, that's where," Slayer muttered. "I bet he disappeared the moment the security shut down. He knows this is a one-shot deal." "Maybe," Ratboy mused. "I would have liked to have seen him." "Why?" asked Slayer. Ratboy shrugged. "I want to know what he looks like," he said. "He's the one who got us out and stuck it to this place. I just wanted to know." Slayer nodded, not really interested anymore, though he did find Ratboy's teary eyes amusing. "Let's go," he grunted. "The director isn't going to wait for us, and we are running out of time." Just then, a loud electric whine filled the corridor, traveling in the direction of the posse. They scattered, hiding behind the door and the bed, but their torches betrayed their positions. The noise screeched to a halt outside the door, and the twin headlights of a vehicle shone yellow light into the room. Shady jumped out of the driver's seat and raced inside to find them all crouched menacingly, their shotguns trained on him. "Oi, don't blast me, you dickheads," he cried. "It's me, it's Shady." "For Christ's sake," Ratboy cursed, standing up. "We thought you were a guard." "Look what I found," Shady exclaimed. "Isn't it cool?" They moved into the wide corridor and surrounded the electric vehicle. It was long and slim, specially designed to be driven through the underground tunnels, with 2 seats at the front and a large tray at the rear for carrying equipment. They all regarded it with nods of approval, except Ratboy. He shook his head and asked, "Great, what are we going to do with it? We can't drive it out of here, because the only way out is to climb up the train. And we can't drive it up the train." Shady's mirth was irrepressible. "Look what's in the tray." They looked. The tray was empty save for a large drum in one corner, marked with a skull and crossbones and the words, "Caution, flammable." Ratboy mentally cursed himself for letting Shady get one up on him again. "I take it there are more of these?" Ratboy asked. Shady nodded. "Lots more," he replied dramatically. Everyone was quiet for a moment. Roan and Styles jumped in and wrestled for the driver's seat. Caliper mentally calculated how many drums would fit on the vehicle's tray and decided it was enough to blow the program to tiny pieces. Guill O'tine stood mesmerized by the Jolly Roger symbol, having never seen one before and thinking it rather beautiful. And Slayer merely rubbed his hands together in anticipation of the destruction to come. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Shady asked. Ratboy nodded and looked to each of his companions with an exquisitely devious grin. Suddenly he realized one was missing, and the smile dropped from his face. "Where's Loco?" he spat. Innocent, guileless faces greeted his inquiry. "All right, cut the bullshit," he snapped. "Did one of you guys kill Loco?" The posse exchanged glances, shaking their heads. "Ah," said Caliper. "Not me," agreed Roan. "Doing Loco is beneath me," spat Styles. "I wouldn't waste my time on him," Slayer grunted. "I would, but I haven't gotten around to it yet," muttered Jill. Caliper leaned forward, resting his elbows on the edge of the vehicle's tray. He'd torn the sleeves off the jacket he was wearing, and his heavily muscled arms gleamed with sweat in the torchlight. "Loco might have returned to the train to pick some more pockets," he suggested. Jill appeared annoyed by this possibility. "Why, that greedy little—" he began to say. "Forget him," Slayer interrupted, his fingers rapping impatiently on the drum of flammable material. "If he wants to take off on his own, that's his problem. We've got more important things to do than look after his hide." "You got that right," Caliper agreed. "I'm not going to watch over him, I ain't his mother." "I'll bet his mother was one ugly hoe," Roan said. "You're ugly enough to be his mother, you know," Styles said. "Are you his mother?" "Screw you," Roan retorted. "Dickless," Styles muttered. "Shut up," Shady Atkins snarled. "Let's head back to engineering and load up the flammables. Loco will probably show up before we finish anyway." Ratboy and Shady left their torches with Caliper and Jill and climbed into the cabin, while the other five jumped into the tray and settled down as best they could. As Shady reversed the vehicle, Ratboy took his last look at the cell that had been home to the Deacon for so many years and wondered if he would ever get the chance to meet the man. Perhaps, when they were all free in the world above, their paths would cross, he thought to himself. Perhaps. Shady floored the accelerator, spinning the rear wheels with an ear-piercing shriek that evoked a cheer from the crowd in the tray. The vehicle tore off down the corridor, swerving around bodies like a car whipping through chicanes on a racetrack. When they arrived at engineering, Shady roared through the open double doors and backed the utility up to the store of drums. The team piled out, holding their torches high and surveying the large room. Carefully propping their fires against anything handy, the 7 fit young madmen filled the tray with as many of the big cylindrical drums as they could. Roan and Shady got into a fight over who would drive, with Roan's threat that he would puncture the vehicle's tires with a blast from his shotgun, eventually ensuring he got a turn at the controls. So when the heavily laden utility pulled away, it was Shady and Roan in the cabin and Ratboy sitting uncomfortably with the others in the rear, all precariously holding their burning torches as far away from the drums as they could, lest they blow themselves straight to hell before they had even escaped. It quickly became apparent that Roan was not the equal of Shady at the steering wheel. En route to the train, the vehicle struck 2 bodies, despite Shady yelling repeated warnings that there were obstacles up ahead. But it was when the utility skidded over the 3rd body that things went badly awry. The corpse got lodged under one of the front wheels, compromising traction. Shady screamed louder, to no avail. The riders in the tray howled their encouragement until the walls began looming dangerously close. Roan spun the wheel furiously, trying to regain control, but the vehicle careered into one wall, ricocheted off, then collided with another. The end result of the incident was a single drum being dislodged from the tray. It bounced off a wall before tumbling down a stairwell, where it split open, spilling the acrid-smelling flammable liquid down the stairs and into the corridor of the level below. Shady Atkins's face turned bright red, and he jumped up and down in fury. "Idiot!" he screamed. "Idiot! Idiot! Idiot!" He flew at Roan in a rage. The combined muscular bulk of Slayer and Caliper was required to prise the pair apart, or else Shady would have beaten the less gifted driver to a pulp there and then. Kicking and screaming, Shady was hauled away to regain his composure. If a serial killer's state of calm can be described as one of composure. while Ratboy shone his torch down the stairwell to determine the fate of the missing drum. His rodent-like nose sniffed the pungent odor in the air, and even without sighting the drum, he knew it had been cracked open. He smiled, wondering if anyone was down there. Level 5 was now highly flammable. When Ratboy returned, the crew had extracted the dead body from under the front wheel and thrown the pieces away. The hardy vehicle had survived the crash and was idling contentedly again under Shady's jealous aegis. Roan received a few solid whacks across the back of the head from the team for his stupidity, with some grumbles about more punishment to come later. Putting aside their fresh misgivings about the safety of the contraption, everybody jumped on board again, and the utility roared away.
That is the end of this chapter. To listen to the next chapter on YouTube or to purchase the digital ebook from Amazon, see the links in the description.